Good morning. This is We Teach Topics, and we are trying to teach, inspire, and learn. Together, we can leave a legacy of good dentistry. I am Dr. Ayman Galal Demeri. This is my email. You can reach me at it at any time. And we will be speaking today how to select items for secondary impressions. The first thing that we are going to select is the retraction material, and it is very important to understand that for taking any secondary impression, it is important to isolate before retraction. Isolation is performed by cotton rolls and suction. And while selecting our retraction, we have two main methods that are present in our market currently. The first is the application of retraction cord, and retraction cord actually comes in different sizes. I usually choose the greatest size that can go inside the sulcus. So if I start with a 00 or a number or a 10, and I find that it is too loose, I will go for the larger retraction cord, and this implies that we do need to have different sizes in our clinic. Whereas if I start with a single 0 and find that mechanically I cannot introduce it inside the sulcus as shown in previous presentations without actually damaging the gum tissues, then I will revert to a smaller size. Also, retraction cords are either provided impregnated or I have to impregnate them outside, so I cannot provide retraction or proper retraction with retraction cord material that is non-impregnated. I have to first introduce it in an impregnation material and then introduce it inside the sulcus. There is a second choice that is present in the market currently, and that is the use of paste, retraction cord paste. Frankly, I always prefer using retraction cord. This provides a better amount of gingival retraction, but sometimes when we are faced with cases where sulcular fluids are actually excessive, or during our preparation we injured the papilla or the interdental tissues, then application of the retraction cord can be quite difficult, and sometimes due to the direct mechanical application and removal of the retraction cord, it sometimes removes the blood clot with it, and bleeding actually comes back, and it prevents us from continuing our impression. So in these specific cases, the use of retraction paste is actually permitted, and it does provide a very kind mechanical retraction to the tissues, as seen in the photograph on the right molar. And at the same time, it has a high concentration of impregnation material, and therefore it does have a high ability to stop the bleeding. There is another case where actually I do prefer using the retraction cord paste, and this is when I have multiple preparations. When I am preparing a full arch, for instance, or I am preparing 10 teeth for laminate veneers, I would prefer using a retraction cord paste, because actually it does save time, because removal of the retraction cord from one tooth to the other until I finish the removal of 10 retraction cords in my case, this will start giving time for the gingiva to actually rebound back and close the sulcus again, and prevent impression material from actually reaching the depth of the sulcus. The second thing that I will need to be able to select is the selection of the tray, and it's very important to understand that selection of the tray is mainly concerned with the size. I do need a size of a tray that actually has uniform space and distance between the tray and my tooth. And in our Egyptian market, actually, we have the most common tray used is this aluminum stock tray that is presented on the left side of the screen. And this is, although it's a good type of tray to use, but unfortunately it is very difficult to clean, and it is marketed as a disposable type of tray. It cannot and should not be autoclaved because it cannot be properly cleaned and therefore cannot be properly disinfected and sterilized. So it is actually for single use. A better type of tray I would prefer is the stainless steel trays. Those are apparent on the right side of the screen. Now these are much more cleaner, they are much more smoother, and they are easier to cleanse from the remnants of impression materials, although they do bear much more perforations, and this gives a better mechanical lock to our impression and actually reduces the failure of the impression procedure. Also, the stainless steel trays, instead of being provided in 3 sizes only as the aluminum trays in our market, they are provided anywhere between 6 to 9 sizes of trays, and usually they come with a diagram or transparency to be able to identify the accurate size for my specific patient. And depending on the manufacturer, he will provide these trays in different sizes, whether 6 to 9 sizes, as I have previously said. And this obviously creates a better, more uniform space between all the dentition and the specific tray. In the market also we do have plastic trays as compared to the previous metallic trays. Plastic trays are actually very good to use. They come in different colors, denoting different sizes, and some of them also are easy to cleanse and are autoclavable, while others they are provided for single use. So you have to understand what type of tray are you using and whether you can clean it and autoclave it and use it again in another patient or not. The third item to select during impression taking is actually the material. And the cheapest material in our Egyptian market is the condensation silicone material. And although impressions taken by the condensation silicone material are relatively accurate, they still do fall behind compared to other types of materials that we will be introducing in our presentation. Now, the dimensional change that actually occurs in the condensation silicone is actually 0.9%, where all other materials that we will be mentioning, they have a dimensional change of only 0.1%, and that's actually a difference to consider. But still, condensation silicone is still provided in our Egyptian market or in the market, European and the US market in the US, and it is still viable to use. We just need to understand that they do have byproducts and therefore they do need to be poured as soon as possible, and they cannot be poured after let's say 6 hours or so, and they cannot be poured several times as our other impression materials. The second impression material that we will be mentioning is the polyether material. Polyether material is a very accurate material to use. It has an excellent hydrophilic property. This implies that the material can displace fluids, whether they be circular fluids or blood. It has the ability to actually displace these fluids and take accurate record and detailed record to areas like the sulcus depth that I don't have high control of fluids in this area. They do come with a shortcoming. Improgum material in specific, or polyethers in general, they are relatively stiff materials, so I wouldn't be using that material with a case with mobile teeth or mobile restorations or ill-retentive restorations. The most commonly used impression material is the addition silicones, and addition silicones are widely provided in our market. They have a very high accuracy of dimensional stability, dimensional change of 0.1%, and they can be poured up to 7 days. They can be poured for several times without even changing. And the only drawback while using addition silicone materials is to take care of our latex gloves. Latex gloves will actually retard the setting of the material, and therefore it will provide us with a non-set impression, which will have dimensional changes. So it is important during the mixing of my impression material that I use vinyl gloves, or I have an ungloved assistant to do this for me. Now, addition silicone has the disadvantage also of being hydrophobic, which implies that it hates fluids, and it cannot retract fluids to take details in these areas. Therefore, a very recent material has been introduced in our market, and it is showing very, very good results in the literature. It is the vinyl polysiloxane ether. It is a combination between polyether and the VPS addition silicone material to try to overcome the disadvantages of both polyether and the VPS. So the VPES is now provided in our market as a hydrophilic material that is not stiff, and therefore it is one of the highly recommended materials to use. This material also has the same dimensional accuracy of 0.1%, and therefore it can be used in conjunction with addition silicones. For instance, I can take a first step putty impression with a normal addition silicone and choose to use a VPES, vinyl polysiloxane ether, as a light, and due to their similar dimensional change, then I can use them together. And because 80% of the material is consisted of VPS material, it will bind chemically to the underlying putty. Now, the next step to select is selection of the consistency. All of the materials that are provided in our market are actually provided in different consistencies. We do see different colors, different cartridges, and we need to understand what these consistencies actually mean. Usually materials are either provided putty, putty soft, heavy, heavy soft, medium, medium soft, light and extra light, and we will be explaining how to mix and match these materials together in our next selection. Now, our next selection is the selection of the technique. The two most common techniques that are used to take my secondary impression is the one-step technique and the two-step techniques. We will be starting with the one-step technique, where we do apply the light material directly inside the patient's mouth, only around the prepared area, whereas our assistant will be applying the base, whether it be putty soft or heavy, and it has to be putty soft. It cannot be putty. It has to be putty soft or a heavy material in our tray, and then we introduce the tray inside the patient's mouth for both consistencies to set together. This will provide an accurate impression of our marginal area, as well as an accurate impression of all the neighboring tissues without all the neighboring soft and hard tissues, without layering of the materials together. They are smooth in one set layer, one layer that is set together. Now this technique is very useful when I have a small number of preparations, if I have 1 or 2 preparations, because on one side it does actually save me a lot of time. I do not have to wait 3-4 minutes for the first step to set and then another 3-4 minutes for the second step to set. Plus it does save a lot of material, and I am using a much lesser amount of light material while performing the one-step technique. Still, we do have the two-step technique. We have another technique called the one-step technique, where we use a heavy soft material in our tray and we sandwich the light in between. We actually create a crater inside the heavy soft in the areas of the dentition, and we can introduce the light directly into the tray if we do not have an assistant, and then we introduce it directly inside the patient's mouth. But this has to be with a heavy soft. Heavy soft is both provided either in a machine mix like the photograph on the left side, or it can be provided as an auto mix in a gun. Now the second type of impression technique is the two-step impression technique, where first we can take a putty impression as a base or a heavy impression as a base, and then we will take the light or the extra light on top of that in another step of impressioning. Now, to understand how to take a two-step impression technique, we need to understand that we do need to provide space for the light. So either before I introduce the putty inside the patient's mouth, I place a sheet, a 25 micron separation sheet over the tray to provide a 25 micron of space all over the impression for my light. Or if this is not provided in our markets, then we will need to scrap our primary base impression. The first step, we need to scrap it, and we need to provide space for the excess light to dissipate through it. Now the scrapping is performed by creating 4 to 6 grooves that are 2 mm in depth and approximately 2 mm in width and approximately 20 mm in length, and these grooves have to be away from the target. They have to be away from my prepared tooth, and this will be cleared out in our next presentation, where we will be providing a demonstration on how to perform a one-step and a two-step technique with the scrapping method. And this is how the two-step technique impression appears, and it is apparent that the grooves are away from our upper left premolar, which is our target in this case. So to sum up, we did have 5 items that we needed to select for taking a secondary impression. First, we introduced how to select our retraction, and we used the 2 most common methods of retraction are the retraction cord material and the retraction paste. Second, we introduced what type of tray to select, and then the types of materials, the different types of consistencies, and the 1- and 2-step techniques. And we did mention that 1-step technique is usually used for a lower number of preparations, whereas the 2-step techniques can be used where I have a larger number of preparations very similar to what we have said for the retraction paste actually. I hope that you have understood how to select the items for the trays. Our next presentation will be a demonstration on how to take the one-step impression technique and how to take the two-step impression technique with the scrapping method. Please await us, and thank you very much for your time.